The military high command and intelligence agencies say they are working on a grand plan involving a joint operational strategy to stem the rampant kidnapping of school children in the northern part of Nigeria. And that's according to an investigative report carried out by Arai's sister outfit, These Day newspapers. This has come even as the Nigerian Army yesterday said it was making concerted efforts to rescue 3 teachers abducted by bandits in Kaduna State, southwest of Nigeria. This type of story has increasingly become the fate befalling education in that part of the country. Analysts say this is a case of double jeopardy, given the frequently repeated and demoralizing statistic of almost 15 million children roaming the streets in that part of Nigeria instead of studying in classrooms. Joining us now to have a closer look at this subject is Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, a management consultant, associate professor, and head Department of Mass Communication, Baze University in Abuja. Dr. Adeniyi, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program. Good morning. Well, hello, Dr. Adeniyi, can you hear me?
Thanks.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
I can hear you very well, Dr. Bati.
Yes, thank you. You have not greeted Tundu, your favorite.
Good morning, Doc.
Yeah, I was going to thank you, Victoria Tundu, Moshood Olawale Abiola, Oseni, and Bati. My pleasure.
Anyway, Dr. Adeniyi, thank you for joining us very quickly. In 6 states of the north, we're told that almost 700 schools have been shut down because of the security situation in that part of the country. Sokoto, Yobe, Kano, Kaduna, schools have been shut down. Only yesterday morning, we were told that, in fact, in Kaduna State, even primary school children were abducted. Now, what does this mean? What does it translate into in terms of the efforts to get children into school in a country where illiteracy and ignorance remain very serious problems?
Yeah, thanks, Doc, once again, and your very cerebral team for bringing me on. You know, the situation we are in is actually a bad one, very unfortunate. But before we think about solutions, permit me to put this in some context, so to say. You know, I remember those days in the 80s up to the 90s, we had some African and Latin American thinkers talking about, you know, the development of underdevelopment. And when they were talking about this, they were referring to the development of the South by the global North. You know, the center underdeveloping the periphery. But that situation has now moved. What we're now having is the development of the periphery by the periphery. First, it started by leaders, you know, who were corrupt, who were misgoverning the society, and now we are now having leaders, you know, state actors being joined by non-state actors to pauperize the poor. So we're having, you know, the binary of state actors and non-state actors combining to impoverish the poor and to further underdevelop the periphery, as the case could be. So we are seeing a shift in narrative, which is very, very unfortunate. But in the circumstance now, what we now need is, you know, for the state actors to rise above the fray, to rise above the situation, you know, and work towards dealing with the non-state actors represented in the bandits, in the kidnappers, and in insurgents, you know, for us to be able to solve this problem. You know, but how do we go about it? First, we can see that they are trying to underdevelop us as a periphery through the prism of education, coming from the north first, before it obviously, we just hope that it will not get to the south in the future, but then we cannot rule this out because Boko Haram initially we thought was a northern problem until the effect, you know, snowballed down south and everywhere, and we all could hardly sleep thereafter. So we hope that it will not go to the south, but in the circumstance, there are some quick solutions that I think we can find to it so that their situation in the north will not worsen. And what are these situations? There were some solutions, you know, backed upon by some development agencies in the past, in the wake of the insurgents displacing people away from school. You know, we're talking about vocational and instructional education. This can help in the immediate circumstance. And what about, you know, relocating the students away from their schools, you know, to safer environment? And how about, you know, integrating them into safer schools, maybe in the more urban centers, like it was done in Adamawa State in the wake of a Boko Haram attack on Mubi, where most of the students were integrated into schools in Yola. How about thinking around this? Then what about, the physical aspect of ramping up security around these vulnerable institutions, vulnerable schools? What has happened to the so-called often repeated security architecture? How can we increase the schools around this northern region consistent with the Safe School initiative? Then I don't want to ask maybe that we should resort to virtual learning in the north. A little bit difficult in the wake of the COVID-19 breakout. Even tertiary institutions found it very difficult to adopt it because of deficiencies, imperfections in this infrastructure. So if it was difficult at those level, I'm not going to be recommending it, for pupils in the northern region, in this circumstance. But there are some other, workable quick wins that we can resort to so that we can mitigate, learning losses, in the wake of these close down of these institutions, as the case could be. Dr. Bati, Tundum, and Rufai.
Thank you, Doctor. You'll recall that President Buhari, in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief, said that the Jangebe incident would be the last. He said this at the end of February, and yet the onslaught continues. What do you think prompted that confidence that he expressed and clearly has not worked? Why?
Well, I think as president, it was merely trying to give us a picture of optimism. As a leader, he probably just wanted to give us hope, that they were in charge. But of course, from what we are seeing in empirical, practical terms, we are seeing the reverse being the case. But ordinarily, from his body language, I do not expect him to be happy with the situation. I want to believe that he's sad with what is happening, but perhaps we're not seeing we're not seeing some physical actions, that will probably be commensurate with his intention or his wishes, so to say. We are seeing some kind of reluctance on the part of those who are supposed to implement, whatever his wishes are as a leader of this country. And the question we've been asking is that if we're seeing some reluctance, some lethargy on the part of his field commanders, why not replace them as often as possible? Why not provide some key performance indicators, so that productivity and efficiency can be much more mathematical.
Well, we'll go for a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk to Dr. Adeniyi when we come back. All right, welcome back to the Morning Show right here on the Rise You channel. We'll still have Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, management consultant and associate professor, head of department, mass communication, Baze University, Abuja, still talking to us about myriads of issues. But Dr. Adeniyi, I just want to take you, I think it was in the early 90s, Kaplan wrote a book. He was talking about the emerging economy in Nigeria and the fault lines, unemployment and the likes. Today, the unemployment numbers came out, very staggering. And that feeds into the insecurity we have in Nigeria. If underemployment could be about 56% in this country, then what's the hope? Youth unemployment and underemployment is about 62% cumulatively. Then what's the hope for the young person in this country? And that also feeds into Godwin Emefiele speaking to WTO boss, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, talking to about how they will start in industries and factories and things like that. What is the clear path to coming out of all of this for Nigeria?
Well, a very good sense of perspective there, Rufai. But first again, your question reminds me of what I once referred to somewhere else as the concentric circle of leadership. And this works in a way where we have the leader in the middle, and we'll have the family next, and of course the community coming afterwards, But the way it's supposed to operate is for the leader to work from the outer ring, taking cognizance of the importance of the community before the family and before the self. But in our own situation, most of the time, we'll have a situation where the leader privileges the interest of the self, before the family next, and of course the community last. So most of the time, before our leaders, not just political leaders, civil service leaders, public service leaders, military leadership, privileging the self, before next the family and before before the rest of us. That's the unfortunate thing we've always had, and those are the things that we need to remedy before we can deal with this myriad of issues coming around us, like the one you just mentioned. I listened to Dr. Uwala yesterday, talked about, the youth budge, and the fact that, we need to be concerned about those who are below 35 years of age, because we are seeing a renewed consciousness among the youths, not just in Nigeria, but across the world. But importantly, in Nigeria, we are seeing a situation, where the population is growing and they are not necessarily being attended to in terms of employment, in terms of well-being, and in terms of care. And we saw an outburst late last year through the NSAS protest. In the future, we don't know what more we are going to see. So as an important element of the classification, what can government do? Perhaps beyond talking about the generalist concept of leadership, perhaps we should also talk about the specifics. We have some relevant ministries, we have some agencies. Earlier on, we've also talked about the need for us to have maybe a ministry, a youth affairs commission, or a commission on youth affairs to address there are problems that, of course, is obviously increasing. And, of course, some of these things, the president has the opportunity to remedy some of these imperfections, some of the things that he promised ahead of his coming into power. And he has a little over 2 years to go. So he can just make some further marks, if he has not made anyone in the past, by attending to not just the youth question, but the question of unemployment and underemployment, across all cadre of ages that is probably also leading to emigration or migration out of this country, as the case could be refined.
Let me take you back to where we started from, and I restate the question differently. Yeah. How do we keep our schools safe? Because at the moment, you have many states of the Federation where the governors, the leaders are absolutely, apparently confused about how to make the schools safe, so that we don't have a situation whereby students at all levels will say they don't want to go to school in a country that needs to compete in the future, now and in the future, as it were.
Well, it is difficult to look away from the need for us to increase, our security, the efficiency of our security agencies in trying to keep our schools safe. Before now, we had a situation where some of the schools are always located outside residential areas, of course, perhaps to encourage learning, to encourage concentration, and to prevent the kids or the students from being distracted. But we had them quite all right, which is also very good in terms of concept and in terms of, the philosophy, the reasoning behind it is very salutary. But, of course, there was a letdown in terms of security. They were hardly protected. These places, sometimes you just find out that they look just like places where you rather keep animals, not to talk about human beings. But in the circumstance, we should think about increasing security around these places. And if it is not possible, can we please relocate, the schools to city centers that are not necessarily vulnerable to attacks by these criminals? Then what about probably having new schools? I don't want to believe that we do not also have the resources for these things, but we have resources for some other things that we see coming out in cases of emergency. Sometimes you wonder where government is always able to raise some of these monies in a situation where we're giving the picture of lack of funds, but when the need arises, you see some of these monies coming out. I imagine that some of these monies can be channeled to much more nobler goals, like the education of our youths, education of our children. And how about having not enough? There are standards really for the construction of schools. There's a distance in which pupils are supposed to travel before they get to where they are going to learn. And we need to understand that there's a difference between education and learning. And there's a between education, schooling, and learning. What are we doing? Are we just concerned about education? Are we just concerned about schooling and ignoring learning? All of them, have to work in tandem. And to get this done, really, it is very difficult for me to look away from the question of physical security. But what what about the intelligence aspect of it? Maybe in the future, we should also be thinking about developing some curriculum around intelligence, on the part of the average citizen, and particularly the students. But maybe we should make them security conscious in a situation where we are being overwhelmed by bandits. We should maybe have to think of this if criminality is not abating. And above all, how about our security agencies? I'm aware that within the rank of Nigerian security agencies, we have counterterrorism experts. What is wrong with those who can also specialize, in rescuing hostages? We see it happening around the world. Very recently, we saw how the Navy SEAL rescued an American somewhere in Niger Republic. And of course, there's the famed Israeli hostage rescuers are also there. What about this, developing sections of our security agencies, in the development, in around the skills on hostage taking? What's wrong with that? Perhaps we also need to think about it if we do not already have it. And I understand that there might be limitations in terms of resources, equipment. But like I said again, if the resources that we have, the little one we have, if they are judiciously used, we have more than enough to deal with, to resolve some of the problems bedeviling us as a people. Dr. Bati, Victoria, and Rufai.
I wanted to talk about our culture, our orientation where education is concerned. Like you rightly pointed out, money is miraculously magicked from some, rabbit in the hat when it comes to other priorities of the government, whereas it doesn't happen with regards to education. Even look at the budgetary allocation given to education year after year. It's pretty abysmal, like 6-7%, compared to other countries that are in the double digits. How do we address that? So it's not too shocking that this is the fallout that we're seeing, right? So how do we address that? In 1 minute, please.
Well, I think it's somewhat, it looks straightforward anyway, but again, it's just for our leaders to have the political will to be concerned about, to privilege education. At a time in the United Kingdom, I remember Tony Blair announced education as the sector that was going to be in focus. We can also do that in this country, such that we can make the most publicized UNICEF standard that the budget of the education sector should be in the region of 26 to 27%. In the last 10 years, it has never gotten up to 10%. Yes, we know the intervention of agencies like TEDFund, like UBEC, but we need some more specifics in terms of expanding the budget, for the education sector, specific, to the Ministry of Education, not necessarily to interventionist agencies like TEDFund. Yes, we know TEDFund is doing a very great job, but it's simply supplementary. We need the ministry itself, being the key beneficiary so that universities and other tertiary institutions can, get perhaps some increased funding, much more than they are getting now, which sometimes provoke ASU and some other associations, to go on strike. These are things that by now I thought we should have been done with, but, well, there's still silver lining.
Well, Dr. Adeniyi, thank you very much for joining us.